Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Victor Manzo of Knoxville, Tennessee, a certified pediatric chiropractor who is also a highly successful business mindset coach. He's the author of 3 books, and they are Rediscover Your Greatness, that was released in about April 2018, A Walk in the Dark, that was released in October 2019, and only recently, Decoding The Matrix. Dr. Vic is also the host of the highly rated podcast, The Mindful Experiment. Today, I'm looking to learn what mindset techniques professionals may utilize to deal with overwhelm and drastically improve their efficiency and effectiveness to become more successful, focused, content, and hopefully positive. So without further delay, I welcome Dr. Vic onto the podcast. Hi.
Appreciate it having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks very much. So perhaps we could start from the beginning of your journey, and you could talk us through for a few minutes a little bit about yourself and share with the listeners how and why you went from a successful certified pediatric chiropractor to a mindset coach.
Yeah, I've always had a curiosity about life and want to know how life works and what makes people good versus great, who makes people successful versus not, who is rich or poor, all these things. Was it just our circumstances? Was it just the cards we were dealt? We had to deal with it, or did we have a choice? And that was always a curiosity for me. So I come up from a blue collar family. So it was one of those things where I saw hardship. I saw the financial struggles. I saw my parents arguing. I saw other people talk about money and argue and this and that. And it was one of those things where I was like, I just don't want to have that life. Like, if I can prevent that in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to. So I wanted to learn how I can do that in some way, shape, or form. And life I bounced around a little bit before I became a chiropractor, because it was one of those things where, it's just life. I was going one way, something happened, directed me this way, and then I went that way, and then eventually became a chiropractor. But that curiosity of the mind and understanding life has always been in the premise. And I'm a type of individual who likes to know the depth of something. So if you tell me, hey, this works, you do this and this works, I'll sit there and go, that's great. I want to know why. And they're like, well, it's just how, look at the patterns. That's great. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I want to know why it does. Like, what other principles can we go deeper to truly understand the inner workings of that? And so one of the things I learned I learned all these different things of spirituality and spiritual truths and universal laws. Being a chiropractor, you learn a lot about the brain and many other factors to where quantum physics and stuff. And I started to apply that in my life, in my business. And for the first 5 years, it was one of those things where I was listening to a lot of what successful chiropractors were doing, following my coaches and doing all that. And I got financial success, but I was burned out, exhausted, unfulfilled. And what I thought money was going to bring me, it didn't. And I had to really re-look at my life. And I started to look at everything. I mean, I did a lot of soul digging and saying, okay, what matters to me? What is business to me? What's success to me? How do I want to run my business? What's important to me? And all these different facets, and not just in business and money, but in my relationships and my health, everything. And I took everything I learned and said, you know what? I'm going to shut the door. I'm going to still listen and stuff. I had a coach who helped me with things, but I was like, I'm going to live my life and dictate it on my terms. I'm going to choose success on my terms, because if I'm truly a creator of my life, then I should be able to create in some way, shape, or form. And so I knew this law called the law of least effort, which means the least amount of work to get the greatest gain. Nature does it. Your body does it. Universe does it. And I said, okay, well, what if I can work less and make more? Crazy idea there, right? And but long story short, 5 years in, a couple of years in, I started working way less, and I was making more. And it was interesting. And I started to say, okay, well, that worked. But what else can I do? And I started to see life as a game. And that's where, as I kept listening to self-help, personal development, business world, the entrepreneur world, and motivational speakers, I got really frustrated in listening to some of the stuff that they share, which is very common. Like, you have to have sweat equity, you have to grind, you have to hustle, you have to outwork your competition to be successful, to be number one, all these different things. And I was like, that's all force. That's all that's not how nature works. And I was like, you know what? I did this in my life, and because I went that route, and that's why I got burned out so much. Shifted my life, didn't get burned out at all, had more fulfillment. And I'm like, you know what? How many people need help with this? I have a system that I put together that has worked for me, that I think is very valuable. It's very foundational. And I was like, I'm going to start doing coaching. And so I wrote my first book, podcast. 4 months later, I started doing coaching and been doing that since. And then just recently, I went full time into coaching about 6 months ago.
Blimey. Okay. That's quite an interesting little journey there, because many people will look at, obviously, a chiropractor as being an example of success, an example of working hard and achieving a very respected position in the community. And to walk away from that in itself is quite a brave thing to do. So that's quite tough.
Oh, it was. I mean, it's one of those things. My wife and I, we wanted to. The reason why I stopped doing chiropractic is because I moved out of state to Knoxville. I'm originally from Chicago, and it was one of those things where we really looked at our life and said, what matters most to us? And we just liked the area of Knoxville with the mountains being near here. It's slower pace, and it was one of those things that we just looked at ourselves and said, do we want to go for what means most to us? Or do you want to just live the life we have in Chicago, which was we had a successful practice. We had a great house. We had nice cars. We had everything, everything that people look at as success. We had all that. And it was and even some people are like, you are doing really well. You're into the community. You have a business that's pretty much on autopilot. Why are you stopping all this? And I was like, we have to make this change. We don't know why. We look crazy. I know it's unheard of. We're going to get a little, it's going to be a totally different lifestyle than what we had before, with all that. But at the same token, I was like, you have to go for what's yours, and you got to take risks in order to, or make scary changes sometimes to really get what you want. And we look at it now 6 months later and like, go, why didn't we do this sooner?
Yeah. It's taking that step off the cliff almost, isn't it? I guess. Yeah. Now, the trouble with the word mindset is that it's so widely used, and perhaps it's too widely used in some respects. It's everywhere at the moment. So let's put some meat on the bones here. So through your mindset trainings, you've got a number of guests, clients, shall I say now. Can you put into context for us some of the most radical shifts that you've facilitated through your training, just through the breadth and depth of how you've shared your thoughts and made a mindset such a factor in their lives that they've achieved a new level of success?
Yeah. So the way I look at mindset is I want you to think of it as like just a pair of glasses that you wear, right? That's all it really is at the end of the day. It's how you see the world, but you have to understand when you say it's just how you see the world, well, what makes you see the world the way you do? That is the inner work of what I do. So those are things like limiting beliefs. Those are your conditionings over time, the baggage you carry on from your past into your future, your belief. I said beliefs already. And so it's looking at how do I shift people's perspective to keep their vibe or their vibration or their energy at a higher state as much as possible. So that's the main essence of what I do. And when it comes from a mindset perspective, but yeah, I mean, once you make these pivotal changes, I've had clients who during COVID, their businesses were shut down. Like literally they could not run their business. And some of them are like, I need to get out of the business. I don't know what to do. And I was like, well, you're coaching. Don't give up on coaching. I went through a very hard time in my business. And the one thing I didn't give up on was coaching. I kept paying for that. And I think that's what gave me when I came out of it, I think that's what gave me that success. But I've had clients where they had this shutdown and we worked on these beliefs, right? Because they believed they couldn't go for that. They couldn't get to these levels. And we worked on those limiting beliefs. And once we removed them, it was like a flip a switch in their brain, in their mind, where all of a sudden they're like, well, maybe I could do this. Maybe this could happen, or maybe I can see this. And that's like the biggest transformational piece. I know it doesn't seem that grand, but I could share the after effects. So now 2 books have been written, online course, got subscription membership course. I have another client who went into shifted a whole business online in a whole different arena, more passionate of what she really liked to do. It was more like, this is what I really love doing. And I said, let's make that a business. And it's like, I don't know how to do that. Everyone says you can't make money from what you love. I said, limiting belief right there. I go, everything I do is only because I love it. I will never get into a business because of the money. I'll always do it because I'm passionate. So I have another client who's a chiropractor, and it's at a point in his life where all of a sudden he just looks and goes, I feel like I'm waking up from a sleep. Like, I feel like I've been sleeping. He goes, now I'm starting to see my conditioning of how I've been kind of programmed, because I use these terminologies. And he's like, now I want to do what I'm doing, but I want to do it in a massively different way. And I said, that's more of what you want instead of what people have been telling you. So these are like kind of some of my goal in working with my clients is really to get them to have the life that they choose to have. not what we've been conditioned, because I went through the conditioning process, got the life what I thought it was supposed to be. Now, and then I had to redo all that and choose it on my terms. And I try to tell my clients all the time, it's what you want, what your dream life is, what you want to achieve. And you're going to do this without sacrificing time, money, family, and health. You're not going to have to grind and hustle. Don't get me wrong. You have to put in the work. I'm not saying there's not work involved. There is work. You have to take action. But I'm like, we're going to use and leverage your mind and how the mind works, how the universe works. And then once we can start to work with those systems, then all of a sudden it's like you're leveraging your mind because it's going to start working automatically on its own. And now you don't have to work as hard to start to create that life that you choose. But yeah, I've had people where one client, you just shifting their mindset and how they saw their business. They grew their profits 128% in a month. That doesn't happen often, but it was just, they had a great business. It was just, they had some blind spots that we had to look through. And it was really more their inner stuff. Like, I was like, why don't you do this instead of this? And then the limiting belief came up and I said, we have to work on this. And it took us about a couple of weeks to get into that. And then all of a sudden, things drastically changed in the business. 30 days later, all of a sudden she's like, wow, I got to tell you, my profits are through the roof. I said, you've always had that potential there, because she had a great business. So it was just, I'm like, there's a couple things that we had to work on you. Notice I didn't give her the business principles. That came way later. It was more of, I need to get you to see that you can run your business in this way. And if you can, let's break through whatever comes up that's holding you back, whatever gets that fear, whatever, that hesitation, or gets you to feel like these weird gnawing butterflies in your stomach, not in a good way. I was like, that's what we need to work on and address that.
It's really interesting. I'd like to dig in a little bit more there, because as we mentioned, conditioning, these are things that have been around us, surrounded us for years and years, from a very small child all the way through school and education and everything else. Then you were obviously social media and the TV and everything else. And so we're suffering this conditioning for many, many years continually. But you managed to change people's way of thinking within weeks. And that seems quite incredible. What fairy dust, what hypnosis technique are you using that helps people to break out of that long-term way of thinking into something new within a matter of days and weeks?
It doesn't happen often. I want to be very clear on that. Some people, it takes 3 months, 6 months to get to those periods, just because they've been so programmed in such a way, and their beliefs, and it just takes time. Some things just take time, some don't. But really, the ones who have had those experiences, I will say that all it was is just seeing life from a different. I had to get them aware of seeing life in a different perspective, right? Because it's kind of hard for me in my work to where I can be like, oh, in 1 week, here we go. Here's what you got going on. Here's your belief. Here's that. Sometimes that does happen. Like I had a person I was on a call with, and in the conversation, I saw a low self-worth issue coming here. And I was like, wow, that's interesting that you have that going on. Let's discuss a little more. And then she shares more of her story. All of a sudden, I'm like, here's the pattern of number 2, low self-worth. I said, let's continue going on. There was another one that came up, and I go, you have to work on your self-worth, or else we're not, you're going to always see this barrier that you're seeing in your life. And you're also going to see it in other areas of your life. And I bet you it shows up in relationships and your physical health. It shows up in your mindset. There's other areas that are going to show up in. And she was just like, holy cow, how are you reading me like this? I'm like, it's just not me. It's just life. When you do something in one area, you're going to do it in another. And so all of a sudden I was like, I gave her homework, and I'm like, I need you to take a moment, sit down, do a meditation. I had some processes and tools that you can do. And then I said, I want you to see, when did you choose that belief to serve you for your life? When did you think you weren't worthy? Who told you? Who was it? An experience? Was it something you saw? Was it someone so told you? And if you can't figure that out, don't worry about it. It's more of a feeling, not a thinking. And if it comes up, great, because then we can work on it and change it. I mean, it's literally, you gave your power to this belief all your life. Well, you're the one that kept it alive. So it's just as easy as switching that belief to something else. And I know that sounds so easy. There are things we work on when we do that. There has to be a construct of an environment to create success for that. So it just can't be, all right, that's what I used to believe. Well, now I'm worthy of $1 billion. It's not going to work that way. You have to have, because you're going to go back to old programming. Your brain hasn't caught up to that yet. Your brain hasn't changed its neural circuitry to that. So that conditioning process and everything that's instilled in that brain of yours, we're going to have to work on catching these things when you go back there. And there's tools and tips that I use to help you be more aware of that. And that's probably the biggest thing I do for a lot of my clients. And this is where sometimes transformation can happen so quick, is just being aware of what their pattern has been, or why they are doing what they're doing, and things like that.
Yeah. What occurs to me is, once people have made this transition, is it something that is then permanent? Or is it something they have to continue to work on? Because as we all know, we'll continue to be surrounded by things that affect us, and we will fail sometimes. And those are the kind of triggers that force people back to the old way, perhaps, of thinking. So is it right? There's a continual journey here that you can't step off the treadmill, otherwise you'll get fat kind of idea.
You know, I always say when you evolve, your inner critic evolves with you. And so it's going to grow with you. It's just like anything, like money, right? You get money. Well, you have more money stuff that goes on. There's going to be more stresses about money. It's just different than where you were before. A homeless person versus a billionaire have two different types of money stresses, but they still have money stresses. So the evolution will always be there. There's always light and dark, right? There's always the good and the bad. There's always technically good can just be around all your life. And that's kind of my share in a lot of stuff I do, but it's just a perspective. But it's one of those things where it will always be something you have to work on. There's things that still get me. Like, I think I have something figured out. I broke through this belief. And then all of a sudden I get triggered by something and I go, all right, if I'm getting triggered, there's something there. I got to go work on this and see what's showing up for me. And this is why I teach a lot of my clients, because this is you let life, I call it leveraging the universe. You let life guide you. It's going to tell you what you need to work on. So sometimes people get angry or frustrated or things like that. I'm like, that's good. And like, what do you mean that's good? You talk about vibrations and emotionals and all that. And that's a low vibration. I'm saying, yeah, but we need that. There's a reason why you're getting angry. And if you could go tap into that, there is more wisdom and things that you'll gain from that to understand why are you really getting angry. And I go, it's not. And I always say, I'm never going from the mind. We do too much of that already. It's a feeling. Like I'll tell them to go sit in a quiet space, do breath work and meditate or journal. And I go, I want you to just feel your body and feel what shows up. And then there'll be imagery that may pop up in your mind. And I go, if you get to that point, start to take an image and then start writing about it or, whatever, record it in some way. I'm like, that imagery is going to be telling you where that's coming from. And it's fascinating because then they'll come back and go, oh my God, I wrote all this stuff. And then I read it and it was just like, I was in tears. It was at this point in some weird, again, I can't say it's going to be one thing or another because it's individual for everybody, but it's really interesting when you using these types of tools to keep you on pace with stuff like that, just like working out.
Okay. As we've spoken before, and you know that I'm from a procurement and supply chain background. And at the moment, as we all know, we're under a lot of pressure. Trying to get products, get services and materials from anywhere is a challenge. And there's constantly this increasing cost around us. So there's lots of people in my world are really kind of struggling with these kind of pressures at the moment. So learning which sort of proven mindset techniques they can use and how to apply them could make quite a shift in their performance and obviously their well-being. So can you share kind of some wisdom of the kind of things that you would suggest these individuals can do to try and take care and help them through this period of overwhelm and perhaps improve their focus and clarity?
Yeah, overwhelm always exists when we have a lack of focus and we let the distractions of life, whatever shows up. So like inflation rates, all that stuff that's going on, those are all distractions that will pull you away from your focus. If you ever look at millionaires or someone who has a very good mindset, a conscious mindset of money, when they go through hardship, they don't shorten their life or shrink it or anything like that. They look and say, okay, how do I have to produce more? What are things that I can do to produce more so that I can fulfill my lifestyle? And that's a very growth mindset, where a fixed mindset says, hey, this is what's happening. I'm going to shrink. And what happens then is you're focusing, right? Let's say just what you just shared, right? The focus was costs are rising, which means I have less now, which means I'm focusing on less money. So what happens is you're going to start to see in your environment, because you're training your brain to do this, especially if you have emotions that are tied to that. Oh, your brain's going to really pick this stuff up. Oh, here's a news article that said this. Oh my God, look what I saw on social media. Someone complaining about gas prices. Look, oh my God, here what I saw here. Oh my God, right here. It's not that was just showing up in your world. It was you who said in your brain, oh my goodness, I value that. That's important because that's survival. So the way the brain works is it's instantly going to go say, okay, we're going to make you more aware of these things. And it's called the reticular activating system, or short for RAS. And so it only allows it filters all this information out. It only allows what you value. So as easy as this is, and this is why I worked with a lot of my clients, especially the ones who are like, oh my God, my business just shut down. I have no money coming in. And there was all that overwhelm, that fear and that anxiety. I was like, let's shift focus to what you want to create. Let's shift your energy and more to a higher vibe. So it's simple practice that you can do that may be a little unorthodox, but it does work with the laws of the universe, is that Focus on, there's two things I share. One is you want to get into a good feeling. Now, a good feeling is something that you've gone through a hard time in your past and you succeeded. This is called anchoring. They use this in self-hypnosis. And what it does is you want to get into that feeling, and you're going to tell your body and your brain, like when you get there, and it's not, you just think about it, but you want to really embrace the feeling in the body. We don't connect with our bodies as much as we should. It's a beautiful system. It's the most advanced technology that will ever exist. And yet we stay away from it. And so it's one of those things where you feel this out and you start to say, you get yourself in a good vibe. And the reason why this is important is because you're shifting your focus more to how do I create more of this? You don't have to understand, and I said how, but you don't have to understand the hows. What you're telling your brain is like, the brain's going to keep picking up on this vibration, and you're sending that out, cause a law of effect. Whatever you put, whatever action is always a reaction. So everything you're putting out there is good vibes. What do you think the universe and the brain eventually is going to have to pick up on and do? It's going to eventually have to bring that into your life. So, and this is us getting out of our heads and trusting the process. The second thing I usually recommend is, and it's very similar, it's just a little different, is you look into the future of what it is you want to create. So let's say you're like, things may be rough, but things may be that. Again, focuses on that lack and on that short. You say, okay, forget that. I'm going to create over my life. Because there's people in the Great Depression who lost a lot of money, and there was people in the Great Depression that made millions and millions of dollars. So why one versus the other? It's all about where their conscious mindset is. And so then it's just shifting the gears to saying, okay, who is that future self I want to be? What's that vision that I have for myself? Well, how do I see myself into the future? And you can even go through like seeing the situation of what it is, because everybody's going through it, and seeing it and saying, this is myself in the future of what I learned from this process. And then you tap into those feelings. What does that feel like? Why is that important? You get into all those that good stuff there, and you raise your vibe. You do this every single day. You can do it multiple times a day. All it takes is about a minute or two. It's not a lot. And you just keep doing this throughout the day. And I usually, when I first started doing this work, I would schedule out, 6 or 8 times throughout the day, sit in a corner really quick, just tap in there, see myself into the future. I start seeing, what is that? What do I feel like? Who am I being? And just what does that all do? And I would just get it into my body and just feel that. Because what you're doing is, not to get too much into the science, but you're looking into the future. So you're kind of time traveling. You're going into the future. And then when you bring your body into it and the feelings, what you're trying to do is you're closing that gap. And so you're making it happen faster. And if you can do those kind of things, these are tips and tricks that you're going to raise your vibe, and you'll start to notice you're not going to see, oh, gas prices are going up. You'll notice it in your consciousness. You won't see it it won't attract to you anymore. It'll be there. It's still showing up. It's on your social media feed. It's all over there, but your mind will literally miss it. And that's how you know you're doing the work, because there's this feedback system. So I teach a lot of my clients. I'm like, you can make changes, but you'll know if you really made it, because the universe is going to tell you that. Life is going to tell you that. You're going to see it show up in areas of your life. And if it's still showing up there, you haven't shifted focus yet. So those are the two biggest things. There are other things too, but those are the two that I usually recommend that are like the biggest thing that you can do, because as long as you shift your energy and keep it in a higher vibration, you're going to be able to create more. You're going to stay in that creative process. You're going to be more in a growth mindset. You're going to be thriving more rather than surviving and being, shrinking and those kind of things.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I was thinking to myself just the other day, when some people face large projects, they're kind of overwhelmed projects, you're not sure how to tackle these things. I quite often see, and I've done it myself, you kind of pick simple tasks, almost like avoidance tasks, to get you a little bit of, oh, that's another job done, that's another job done, and I've succeeded. But you're not actually taking control of the main issue. You're not tackling that elephant in the room. Now, why do we do that? Is it because we're trying to get some kind of good feelings, build ourselves up to tackle that big, difficult problem? Or what's behind that? Is it just purely procrastination and avoidance?
There's a question about like, why do we get overwhelmed when we have to face a big project or something like that?
Yeah, but you pick things to give you little highs, don't you? You think, oh, there's a small task. I can do that in a few minutes. And you feel good about that. And then you do another one and feel good about that. But you're still not tackling the main problem, are you?
Yeah, well, there's something about the brain has something called the mind gap. And what it does is that, like, whenever, let's say you make $50,000 a year and you're like, I want to make $1 million. Your brain goes, yeah, we've never been there. That's a huge gap, never happening, right? So it'll go into overwhelm and all these other feelings that will come in from that. Sometimes when we face things that are in a big way, a big project or a big problem or something, there may be a form of avoiding, just depending on what you're doing. Like some of the advice you're giving actually is something I would give, like, hey, just focus on little things over a period of time. Don't focus so much on making getting all this done. Just focus on little things that move the needle, because the brain likes little victories. It likes momentum. So as long as you're moving towards something, it's going to be a bigger thing to do for that. Am I kind of answering the question with that? Am I on the right path path with this?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to get there. It's actually a good thing to try and get some wins under your belt then to change your mood and perhaps refocus yourself. Because sometimes I'm wondering whether people are just avoiding the problem by trying to do these little things.
What happens when they avoid, they shut down. And that's just because it's too much. And that's kind of what the brain does. 50,000 to a million, it shut down. Or if I say a vocabulary word that you're like, a word that you're just like, it's so big and huge and you're like, what the heck? What did you just say? Your brain literally will shut down. So that's a natural brain response when you have, I call it the brain gap. But it's anything that you face in life, no matter what it is, the brain can understand things in small portions. So like if you were 50,000, you want to make a million. Okay. You have to break that down so small to see, oh, okay, that's all it is. Okay. That's still high, but I can grasp that. Okay. What do I need to do to get to that at least? And then it's the same thing with a project. Anytime you have something big, it's just say, okay, how can I focus on, and I can go in many directions. Like some people who write books, they like to, instead of writing it all at once, they'll be like, I'm just going to write 5 to 15 minutes a day. And then when it comes time to it, the book will be done. There's some great writers who've written 30, 40, 50 books. And they said, that's how they write their books. Little steps and actions a day. Jerry Seinfeld, the richest comedian, most successful comedian in the world, right? He still every day just writes jokes every day. He has a long list of jokes. What does he do? He just writes them little time every day. So it's that, and the way the brain works and how that works is, and this is all about focus and clarity, because now you're like not being overwhelmed. You're saying, I always tell people, I tell my clients this, what is the thing that you can do today? 1, 2, or 3. This is a billionaire mindset. This is what billionaires do a lot, and a lot of high achieving millionaires. And I say, what's 1, 2, or 3 things that you can do today to just move the needle a little forward? Don't get caught up on where you need to be. Just focus on what you can do right now at this moment that moves you a little forward. And I said, as long as you can do that and you feel good about that, right? Here comes that feeling. There's a theme here. As long as you're feeling good about that, and we can get you to that state. And sometimes you just got to lower down their expectations. Because I was like that. I'm a type A driver person. So before I'll be like, I'm getting 50 things done today. And if I don't get 50 things done today, it's not successful. Now I'm like, I got 3 things to do this week. There's a lot of other things I need to do, but those are the 3 I need to win with. And if I get those done, hey, great success. And what happened in my life is all of a sudden I noticed that I was getting those 2 or 3 things done early, and I had more time to do other because I wasn't so focused on everything. I was hyper focused on just doing one little thing at a time and spacing my time out to say, this is when I'm going to do this. And this is how you practice. This is how all these effort gets, works, because you're going to actually you're going to have more energy laser focused into something. And the more you do that, the more you get accomplished in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. Now, does that come on to the terminology, the free flow state? Sometimes you can focus on something, you get your head straight, and before you know it, you've banged out a lot of work and 2 hours have gone by. You've been really in the zone, but trying to get in the zone is the hard bit, I find. What do you recommend for people trying to get in the zone?
It's a feeling. It's not a thought process. There's a lot of times people think I have to get to this place, and it's not there. It's here. And you just got to get into a feeling. And for me, I know it's a very uplifting feeling. And sometimes I can use things like I shared before. Like I'll think of an old time, or I like to play sports. I was big in the baseball. So I'll think of a time where there was a challenging moment and the weight was on me and I had to stand. There was a pressure, the game winning or whatever it may have been. And I succeeded. And so I just keep focusing on playing that in my head. And then you'll feel good. You'll get excited. You'll get energized. And then that's kind of helps you in that place. That's what works for me. Some people do it in many other areas, but I know a lot of people who are successful in public speaking arenas. This is what they'll do before they speak. They'll get into a state and they anchor themselves into a high vibe. That's how I did it that's how usually what I do. Like, I wrote my 3rd book and some people ask me like, okay, how long did this one take? Because I've talked about in my first 2 using this kind of process. And they're like, how do you get it took me less than 24 hours of actually writing my book to get it done. And people will be like, how the heck did you do that? And I said, all I do is put myself in a centered place in a state. And once I get to that place, it's just a feeling. It comes. Sometimes it takes 30 minutes to get there. Sometimes it's an hour and a half. Sometimes it's 15 minutes. It just varies on the day. But once it's there, all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And then I just start going. And every time I get more into it, the more I get into that flow state. It's just like anything in sports or in life. When you're in that state, it's really powerful. And there are things you can do to, get yourself there. But the easiest ones that I use is just anchoring into that good vibe, that good feeling. And when you have that uplifting feeling, again, to save the neurology, you'll shift into a different part of your nervous system, which is going to affect a different part of the brain where you can get into more focus and more deeper thought and so forth.
Really interesting. That's great. Now, some of the other things I kind of notice is people make sometimes when they're under pressure, start to make kind of out of character mistakes. Things they would never normally get wrong, they start getting wrong. And that kind of takes them down a kind of spiral of negativity and frustration and such. So are there some practices when you get into that spiral, and perhaps certainly this is a case in the UK, I don't know about America, people tend to think things go wrong in threes. And until that third thing has gone wrong, they cannot snap out of this worry that something else is going to happen. They can't move on. What kind of things can you do to break that cycle?
I love that. In America, well, in Italian culture, I don't know if it's in Italian. I hear it a lot in the Italian culture. Like things happen in threes with deaths. You get 1, 2, and then you just got to wait for that third one. And those things are only true because you've been conditioned to say that's how it is, right? It's this old conditioning. Where did it come from? Well, someone just had it happen and said, "Well, that's interesting. That was 3. I had to wait. The third 3 things happened to me." Then someone else said, "Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that happens to me." And they start looking for it. Then all of a sudden it happens to them. Anyway, I digress. The easiest thing to do, real simple, go take a cold shower or jump in cold water. The simplest thing, because shock the nervous system. Because what's going to happen is you go into survival mode. The body's going to be like, what the heck? There's a threat of cold. And all of a sudden it takes all the energy off whatever you were focusing on, whatever you're worrying about, whatever that was. And all of a sudden it has to focus on survival. Once you get done with that and you come out, there's this feeling of like, oh, good. The stress is gone. Now you're in an uplifted feeling. And so you're not going to be so hung in on those kind of things. You can kind of reposition. But there's other things you can do. Breathing, breath work. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of form of breath work you practice. There are a gazillion of them out there. You can Google them. There's at least 20 of them you'll find. But the thing about breath work is it neutralizes your nervous system. So it centers you back. So you don't go down the lower vibe or negative thinking. It'll get into a good state to where you can create again. For me, I use a lot of meditation. So I just like to sit in a calm place, reset my mind, just get refocused. There's a power about just focusing back here, getting you back into the present moment. Because when you get into those states, you're worrying, you have anxiety or anxiousness, you overwhelm, you're into the future. And so we got to get the mind back here into where your power is. That works for me for the most part, to get out of that state and then just say, you know what, this is what it is. But you have to also understand, like you're saying, bad things happen in threes. Stop saying that. Say no bad things happen. I'm not saying nothing will happen, but it's like, don't keep saying that because you're going to keep seeing it. And the moment that you've actually conditioned your brain on that is when it doesn't show up anymore. And this is to clarify, I remember I said earlier, there's not really any bad things per se, because if you ever look at bad things, it can be bad, but if you shift your perspective, it can actually help you grow. And you can actually even choose how you want to learn from that or what it's going to mean for you. And it's very powerful because now you're not allowing life to happen to you. Your life, you're going to say, I call this being a spiritual alchemist, because you're changing energy. And so what you're doing is you're taking something that's like, oh, this could be viewed on many people in my family and my friends, and everybody says this is bad. No. This may not feel good. This may be uncomfortable. Yes. It's painful at times. Yes. It doesn't last forever, but I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to help it teach me to become better, or it's going to help me get closer to being my future self, or it's going to help me, whatever you want to program that to be. And what's fascinating about life is that when you really practice this, you can literally, like when something happens, like when my wife and I get in an argument, in my back of my mind, I've conditioned myself this way. This is going to help us with our communication. This is going to help us deepen our relationship. And this is going to help us become stronger as a couple. I will tell you, in the last 5 years, 6 years since I've said that to myself, I had to do a lot of conscious work on that. It has, like, I look at my relationship now, I'm like, she's my rock. Like, it's just amazing how we evolved. And again, it's one of those things of, again, starting to shift perspective in a way and then program it in that way. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's great. Just before we come to the end now, and I'll ask you a final question, can you share with my audience where they can find more about you, find your book, where your social media, etc.?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Website is the best to find me on everything. It's like my central hub. So it's empoweryourreality.com. I have my free resources there. My podcast is up there. All my socials are on the bottom left of the website. I'm on Facebook. I play on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. So you can find me all on there. If you have questions or anything, I always tell people you can message me. I do read my messages. I do respond to my messages because I love what I do. And I love just, giving help and insight any way I possibly can, to really much just for me at the end of the day, because I wish I had this sooner.
Fantastic. I just wanted to and get your thoughts on this. There's a lot of things on social media, and you mentioned the word TikTok. I'm interested by that because there's quite a few posts that give people things to kind of believe in, and I'm not sure if it's right or not, you get the sounds come up. I'll listen to this sound and your day is going to be fantastic. You can find those other posts where you've got 444 and whatever it is, this means so-and-so and so-and-so. Now, is that a kind of trying to condition people? Is that a positive thing? Or do you think it's a negative thing for the mind, those kind of posts?
It all depends how the person's responding to it, because you're what you're doing when you like, there's two ways of looking at this. The way I see things is you're giving your power away because you keep looking for the next thing. Because our minds we're not conditioned to like take one thing and study it like crazy. We're just not that way. If somebody does that, we think they're weird. And this is even people back in like the 50s and 60s would do that and they thought they were weird. Like, what's the next thing I need to be focusing on, right? And that's what TikTok and all these things are doing with shorter videos and shorter times. So you're always looking outside yourself. You learn one new thing. Oh, that felt great. Week later, I'm not getting the vibe. I got to look for something else. So it gets you in this trap of always looking away from yourself. Now, the reason why I said there's another side to that story is because if you were like centered and looking in yourself and asking questions and like doing your inner work and saying, well, man, I would love to learn how I don't know where to even go to study XYZ or whatever. And then something comes up and you say, wow, that was fascinating. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go study that for a while. And I'm going to learn from that. And then maybe the person has other stuff that they teach that I can learn from similar to that. And that's a different process, because you're not going all over the place. You're just like, I'm going to hone in on one. I always tell people this, like, if you find something you really like or someone's message or whatever that may be, learn from them, study them. If they have books, if they have podcasts, whatever this, study and learn from them, and don't study anything else. Just study them. So that way you can really grasp it. And that's a more centered focus thing, because when we look at technology in general, it's even like Facebook and stuff, I've talked about this on my podcast of how detrimental it is to the mind and dopamine responses. But then I also flip the side and say, well, remember, technology is always neutral. It's how we use it that gives us the positive or negative. And so then I'm like, well, here's the positive that it can bring depending on what you do and how you look at it. Again, that whole perspective. But I think coming back to that, though, is if we keep always looking for something else, and that's how it is inside. This would happen to me, too. Like, what's a successful chiropractor and entrepreneur? What are the most successful entrepreneurs? What are they reading? What are they doing? Here's 10 books you should be reading right now to be blah, 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 blah. Here's this. And I was caught up on that until now. If you ask me how many books I read a year, I still read about, anywhere from 15 to 25 a year. But that book, I read it. And I only read books that are what I need to learn at this time. So it's not listening to anybody anymore. It's more like, oh, this keeps showing up in my life. I'm going to study this a little bit. I want to master what's going on here. And then what do I need? Do I have to hire a coach? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that to learn from that? And so that's where I'll study reading books and listening to podcasts to grasp and get a handle on it. But that's kind of the process I do. But yeah, it's a way of you just constantly are looking outside yourself rather than looking inside yourself.
That's really good. That's really good. I personally find that I do a meditation in the morning, I do a meditation in the evening, and I have Post-it notes on my mirror. So, when I wake up and I look in the mirror, apart from being horrified by what I see for myself, you can see I've got little Post-it notes up on the mirror saying different things, about making you feel good about yourself, things you've achieved. I am this, I am that. So I'm hopeful that is actually a good way to start the day, and it's a good way to finish the day with the similar kind of techniques. Would you say that that's correct or not?
Oh, that's absolutely. Setting your vibe and tone in the morning is the most important thing you can do, because it makes it harder for you to get distracted or derailed in some way, shape, or form. And then the evenings is great because you're kind of honing in. So think about it. When you go to sleep at night, you woke up in a good vibe, right? You set that tone there. And then at night, you're setting the tone there. You're always neutral and a good vibe when you're sleeping. That's how these are one tricks that you can do to train your subconscious mind to be more in that type of habit and conditioning. And you'll start to notice it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Life gets in the way. Things happen. It's part of life. We're never going to be always perfectly happy. It's just never going to happen. But you can be, I always tell my wife, and I go back and forth on this all the time. I go, happiness is an external event. It's not something internal. And she'll be like, well, she goes, what do you say then? I say joy. And she's like, yeah, but joy's the same thing. I'm like, no, because you can have a bad thing happen to you. But if you're in a state of joy, you're not going to let it get to you in a way. Like when I study like Buddhist masters and stuff, let's say their father dies and you'll see them smiling and they're like, why are they smiling? And then he'll talk about all the wonderful memories that he had with his father. They're like, weren't you sad? Your dad left. My dad has never left. He's with me. He's here. And it's just a different way of looking at it. It's like, and hardship can show up and they're like, yeah, no, they have that's inner joy. Like no matter what happens in your life, you'll see in a different way, in perspective, that keeps you in the high vibe. It's not that you're like not paying attention to the lower stuff. It's just they're in such a state, and I'm still working to get to that state. So where I'm just like, that's fine. It's all good. This is how it is, or this is or something along those lines, to where it doesn't move me one way or the other, and it just keeps me in the center where I am.
I love that. It's a brilliant analogy referring to the monk and that. So, it's a great way to end on today. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Vic. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for sharing all this good information and wisdom with my audience today.
No, thanks for having me. You're a great host. Great questions. I had a blast.
Thanks, and take care. Bye.
You too.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it, and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.